Right, thanks so much, Linda. Yes, so Marigold and I had a week's holiday in Switzerland. Actually, it was 2 weeks in Switzerland, of which one week was with Marigold's brother and his family, and one week was in the Upper Engadine Valley in Switzerland. This was a nature trek trip, and it started right at the very beginning of July. So I'm going to talk about some of the flowers that we saw, quite a few of the insects and a few animals. Not so much about the birds, principally because we didn't actually see that many birds, and I took photographs of very much fewer. But I will mention them as we go through, and I've got a few photographs of birds. Right. So, firstly, where is the Upper Engadine? Um, well, hopefully we all know where Switzerland is for a start. But Switzerland is composed of a number of cantons, and the Upper Engadine is in the largest canton of Switzerland, which is Graubünden or Grisons or Grigione or Lichun, depending which language you speak. Which is in the southeast corner of Switzerland. As I say, it's geographically the largest canton. Population is only probably 200,000 or so. Um, and it's got quite an interesting linguistic aspect to it. Uh, Switzerland has four official languages, but most individual cantons have one or at most two. Graubünden is the only canton with three official languages, and it's really quite a complicated picture within Graubünden as to which languages are spoken and where. Mixes of German, Italian, and the rather obscure language Romansh, which is well, it's derived from Latin with heavy German influences. So you get this complicated mishmash of languages. Um, the Engadine itself, I'll come to why it's called the Engadine, is in this corner here of Graubünden. So we really are in the very southeast corner of Switzerland. Engadine comes from the name of the Inn River. Apparently, there's a sort of a word with Celtic roots, en, which means river. And it is indeed known as the Engadine within Switzerland, but it's the Inn River, which then flows, as you see here, through Austria and Germany and goes into the Danube, and which therefore comes out in the Black Sea. It's on there's a watershed here, and in fact, in part of the area where we were, and I'll say more about this in a minute, the river flows, the water will flow southeastwards and then out into the Po and out into the Adriatic, and further west of there, you can end up in the Rhine. So, but the Engadine Valley itself is, as I say, goes out into the Danube. So the three parts, the Upper Engadine, surprise, surprise, is the upper part of the river, which I've circled here in purple. That's about 50 kilometers long. Then you get a 50 kilometers of the lower Engadine as it leaves Switzerland and then flows out. And we were partly in literally this upper part of the Engadine, but also in one of its tributaries, which is the Bernina River. And so we're in that sort of upside down Y shape. So if I zoom in on a map of the area, the most famous town is St. Moritz. This is the Upper Engadine itself, flows through three lakes, and then out this way off the top of the screen. We also, as I say, were in the Bernina, and our hotel was here in Pontresina. And I'll take you through. I've had various thoughts about, do I go through in time wise or in height wise and geology wise, plant group wise? How do I structure this? In fact, I'll just go through in the order more or less that we did the holiday. And I've highlighted here the various parts that we went. Population of St. Moritz, by the way, is about 5,500, and Pontresina about 2,500. So it's lightly populated. Um, Before I talk about any wildlife or fauna or flora, a little bit about geology, which helps explain some of the varieties we get here. So I've overlaid this with a color-coded thing according to the type of rocks. This sort of reddish color is igneous and metamorphic rocks, which is much of it. Um, you get these little blue strips, which are sedimentary rocks, mainly limestone, actually. And then in the valleys, you get all this so-called unconsolidated rock, which is glacial moraines, river deposits, scree, and so on, and it's what's come off the hills, basically. Then, of course, you get some glaciers, and we'll have more of that later. So here's the area we went to, and the first place I'm going to talk about is down here in the southeastern corner, Alp Grüm, which is on a watershed. Alp, of course, is a mountain meadow, and this area starts up at just over the watershed to where the river starts flowing out southeastwards and not into the Inn River. And if I zoom in on that, you'll see that we started here at Alp Grüm Station. The whole Bernina Valley is served by the world famous, in fact, it's a World Heritage Site, Bernina Railway. So we start at the Alp Grüm Station. You can see how the railway has to zigzag down this very steep slope in all kinds of loops. We walk up to the Belvedere, which is really a cafe with a fantastic view, but you'll cross the meadows as you walk. Then back down across the station, through the wooded hillside, and essentially down, eventually emerging in the flat river valley bottom with the wet meadows down there, and some interesting bits of geology rather, that I'll talk about later. So that's the sort of walk we did, and that's relevant because it gives you a variety of different habitats. But first of all, I show you some of the sites. Here is just off the screen to the right is the Alp Grüm station, and you can see as soon as the train leaves the station, it goes around this hairpin bend. They do occasionally put these tourist open carriages on the back, so you get uninterrupted views of the Alps, and as you see, it's quite some spectacular views. But we're sitting I'm at that point standing on the meadow above the station. But I don't actually need to be on the meadow before you start seeing some wildlife, because the station itself is cut into the side of the mountain, and on the rock you can see a variety of flowers to start with. There are lots of members of the primrose family which will pop up during this talk. This one is the bird's eye primrose. I'm not going to talk through every single plant or animal on all of my slides. Southern butterwort is of course one of these carnivorous plants with some sticky hairs. And I should also, by the way, give some credit to Marigold, who's provided quite a few of the photographs. Most of them are mine, but quite a few of the photographs in this presentation are marigolds. So that's the plants of the rock at the side of the station. Then we get into this meadow. I've only just left the station here, and you can see the electrification mast of the railway. The station is just below, off the screen to the left. And we're into this fantastic floral meadow. Really lots and lots of different flowers mixed in there. The alpine pasque flowers here were over. These are their seed heads. But hold that thought until later in the talk, when you'll see some of the spectacular views of the fields of the flowers actually in bloom. There are all kinds of different things. There's this lovely geranium, and then there are orchids. We saw in the area there are lots of different gentians. I'm not sure if I've got any alpine gentians in here, but these are trumpet gentians on this slide. Lousewort is a parasitic plant, and so on and so forth. And there are some Insects. Being a meadow, lots of flowers, lots of things for insects to eat, herbs and so on. So we have the small blue, which is sometimes called the little blue. Males on the left. This butterfly is quite a small butterfly, hence the name. The male is sort of suffused with a little bit of blue around it. The female is just purely grey-brown. And we also had common heath and various other butterflies. And so we're already looking down on another hairpin. This is the same train about 10 minutes later, 5 or 10 minutes later, going around another one of its steep loops. It's still only about a third of the way down. But you get an idea of, first of all, here, the wooded area that we walked down on the side of the hill, and then the flat meadow at the bottom by the river, which is also quite a wet meadow. So as we start walking down through this coniferous wood, we get some plants, some more plants, again, yet more orchids. And a specialist of the coniferous woods, which is the coalroot orchid. These are more acidic soils, coniferous woods, which is what the coalroot likes, which is a leafless plant. It gets a lot of its nutrient from the fungus it coexists with, but it does do a bit of its own photosynthesis. And just to mention some birds, in this wood we heard nutcracker, and I heard quite a lot of crested tits moving around. No photographs, as they're hard to see, but I did actually sort of see some at a distance. Scrambling over some of the rocks in the wood was this alpine clematis, and growing out of the rocks there were house plants, and this was something that we saw in quite a lot of places. Lots of house leeks, not house plants. So quite a variety of different plants as we went down through and down to the meadow, including another coniferous specialist, by the way, was this one-flowered wintergreen, which is a tiny little plant, and the flower is probably only about 6 or 7 centimeters high. And Marigold managed to get a photograph underneath the flower looking up at it. So that was quite interesting to see. Also, what I call local versions of some butterflies that we're familiar with. So we have here we have the green veined white in this country, with the green veins on the undersides of its wings, which is just the same. But the mountain green veined white has instead of having the white upper surface to the wings that ours has, it has this sort of sooty color, which is quite different. Whereas the southern small white is very like our small white. There are some small differences on the dark tip of its wings, which this one is so worn you can't see that difference really. But the other difference is that this spot here is square on the southern small white. So a couple of local versions of butterflies we see here in Milton Keynes. And a few beetles. I thought I'd throw those in. Neither of them were following their English names. They were both on the wrong plants. So the green mint wasn't on mint, and the dead nettle leaf beetle was, I think, on a rumex, a dock family member. About a centimetre long they are. But here we are. Here's the river in the bottom of the valley. Some parts of it are a bit damp, as we'll see later. More flowers in the meadow, just full of flowers. They've got yellow rattle, they've got these campanula, oxeye daisies, all kinds of different things, and including these gorgeous wild pansies, viola tricolor. Another thing to mention, as seen by some of the signs, we've now switched, we've gone over the thing and we're into the area which is where Italian is the primary language. We're still in Switzerland, but Italian is now the primary language. As we walk down, we get to this geologically interesting area, which I think is coming up on my next slide. But we saw another plant which is truly native of the area, which is masterwort. Now, masterwort has been spread or introduced in lots of places, but here it properly belongs. And as we'll see through this presentation, there are lots of plants that specialize in growing on or over in rocks or in crevices, like this biting stonecrop. So the geological interest, and this is down in the far southeast corner, as I said at the beginning, is these pots. Marmita, as you see in Italian, or marmite in French, which means a cooking pot. And they are created by glaciers, or associated with glaciers, let's say. They vary in size a bit, but they're, let's say, 2 or 3 meters across and 5 to 10 meters deep. And I think there were probably about 30 of them in this particular area. They're caused as a result of water. If you have a glacier, which in summertime there's there's some melt going on the surface of the glacier, water starts running along the top surface of the glacier. If it comes across crevasse, the water falls down the crevasse into the bottom of the glacier. You get sort of a waterfall, and this is picked up the boulders and the stones that the glacier's carrying, having broken off the mountain. And these falling down as the waterfall scour out these fascinating pots. And anyhow, they're usually left then full of sediment and pebbles and boulders and so on. These have all been dug out, and they've just left a few token stones in to show you what they did. But that was interesting to see. And then we walked back again to the local station at the Cavaglia and past another wet meadow specialist, is this rush here. So the meadow, of course, had yet more Lepidoptera in it. These are all smallish species. Couldn't get a very good angle on that 9-spotted moth, which is a bit larger than average and quite nicely patterned. So next, we did a circular walk around this peak called Piz Nair, and if this is up a valley called the Val Minor. So I'm not sure quite how well these animations are coming out on Zoom, but hopefully you're getting the idea when I zoom in. So we started off here at the station. I've deliberately changed to show the geology, and we walked up this valley here to be around this peak, this mountain peak called Piz Nair, and then down another valley to the next railway station. I put the geology up because it's very relevant to what's going on with the flora. The valley here starts below. On the other side of the valley, you have the Piz Alp, which is limestone. So you have this, which is the mixture of scree and moraine in the valley. You have the igneous rock, metamorphic rocks here as well, which is slightly acidic. So you end up, as you climb up the valley, you're getting these things where the rocks have fallen off the mountain and they're limestone. And that leads to some interesting effects. So here you see lots of, this is the side of the mountain, you see lots and lots of lumps of boulders of bits of limestone. But here we are looking back towards the railway as we're about to walk away from it. And if you turn around, this is the direction we're going to follow, walking up this track, and then across here and behind this ridge, and so on and so on around. So this is Piz Nair here. We walk on for that way. But you might just, if you've got a big screen, start to make out there's a herd of cows here. And that's crucial. I've included a Swiss cow in the presentation because actually they're very important to what we see here is the flora. They are why this habitat is here. It would otherwise be covered with small scrub and bushes and so on. But they're there grazing it, and the farmers are paid subsidised a fortune by the Swiss government to keep them there. They're why this lovely pasture land in the Alps exists. And there we have a cow, as I say, complete with its cowbell. But we don't just have cows. Other creatures also exploit these meadows as well. And that's the alpine marmot. Now, this one is not making any sounds, but almost everywhere we went on these meadows, you could hear the beep, beep, beep call of the marmot as they alerted their neighbours to dangers. This one is just wandering around. Sorry, the shot is slightly wobbly. It was on a very long zoom and handheld. But here you see the contrasts. So this is Piz Nair, or a ridge from it, and here you see this gully here where the limestone rocks are falling down and it's wetter, and the drier bits with less rock fallen on it as well. And so you see very visibly the differences in vegetation. And one could form an association of different plants to what was going on in the soil underneath. I wouldn't stretch it too far, but this gloriously scented Daphne was tended to be in the soils that were neutral to acid. And the frog orchid too, although I don't know whether that's official, if you see what I mean. The spring gentians seem to prefer the alkaline soils. Frog orchid, by the way, is pollinated by beetles and ants. And I should mention as we go through this, I mean, here we're just looking at the lower valleys so far, but whether in the lower valleys or up on the peaks of the mountains, virtually all of the flowers are insect pollinated. And if you think about it, they're not wind pollinated, they're insect pollinated, which means there are insects up above the snow line doing the pollination, which I think is really quite fascinating. Anyhow, there's some other plants that seem to be, not too fussed about what was going on in the soil underneath. I'll call out the moss campion. For those who don't know it, it's actually fairly well named in English. It is like a sort of almost like a moss, low growing over a rock as a clump with these beautiful, pretty pink flowers, which were out when we were there. But there was also something that the very different habit, dodder. There was some dodder around as well. And there were some butterflies. So yet again, this is a local version of a butterfly that we have. So we have the plain grizzled skipper. And there's also now in Switzerland, there's this southern grizzled skipper. And they didn't just exist in ones, they existed in whole groups of them. Here you see a whole collection of southern grizzled skippers and little blues, small blues. And what are they doing? Well, you can see that this is a bit of dried cow pat. And in fact, this is just wet, damp ground, and they are there collecting the minerals out of the soil. And that was very nice to see. And we're probably at about 2,000 meters, just a bit more at this point. And you can see some of the snow is still lying. This is the sort of first snow which we're getting up close to. But it's a fantastic place to stop and have lunch. We've got a little stream down there. On the more northern facing slopes, you've got the remaining bits of snow. As I say, we're gradually climbing up this valley. This valley just climbs up the hill. we've got the soil's getting a bit thinner. There's a bit less vegetation slightly at this level, but there's still plenty of it. And this will continue. We don't just have butterflies. Because we've got cows and cow dung, we have dung beetles. And this one decided to take an interest and crawl over me when I was eating my lunch. And I turned it over for two reasons. One is because it helps identify the species, and you do that by looking at its hind leg. But also several of these species have this gorgeous violet sheen underneath, which is wonderful to look at. And it's not just beetles and butterflies. There are reptiles, cold-blooded animals. Here we have a viviparous lizard and a common frog. Now, viviparous lizard does indeed give birth to live young. Interestingly, there's a bit of a debate going on because some of them elsewhere, so supposedly the same species in southwestern France, the Pyrenees, they prefer to lay eggs. So same species, two different ways of breeding, seems a bit odd. But anyhow, these give birth to live young, and they survive the winter. They will go down into burrows if they can find them under a bit of mud, or somewhere just wet. The snow, when it falls, of course, acts as a bit of an insulating blanket. Sounds odd to say it, but it is actually it's rather warmer beneath the snow. And if they manage to keep themselves above -3 degrees, they'll just hibernate, much as they look here. This one's obviously not hibernating. It's come out and is hunting for insects. But they'll be fine. If it goes below -3 degrees, they will actually freeze. And that's okay. They can be frozen and they'll come out the next year. In fact, they don't breed until they're 2 years old, and they typically live 5 or 6 years. And frogs will do the same of overwintering. So one thinks, oh, high in the Alps must be freezing cold. Well, they still manage the cold-blooded animals still survive. So here we are continuing to climb up the valley, and you can see there's rather more snow on the north-facing slopes as we go up. And I don't know if you can tell, but things are just getting a bit less green, a bit less vegetation. But still, on the south-facing slopes, here are the pass flowers in full flower, and there's tens of thousands of them. Fantastic looking at. And in fact, the tour leader said he's been coming there for 18 years, and he's never seen so many. It really was magnificent. And we continue to climb, and now we are pretty much getting towards the snow line, and where the snow has only just melted, and we're starting to get to some flowers that are amongst the first to appear once the snow has gone. More Primula family members. This is the entirely Primula, and there'll be more yet. But also we have two species of snowbells. This is a slightly larger one. It's probably, I don't know, 10, 15 centimeters high maximum. But the true specialist at appearing as soon as the snow disappears is the dwarf snowbell. And this really does, as I say, come out as soon as the snow has disappeared. And it's got these lovely twin, usually stem flowers on its stem. And there's been a recent 5 years ago, scientific paper on explaining what these are up to, because they managed to grow under the snow while it's still lying, and the bud is developing and the flower is expanding. It doesn't come out, but the thing is growing, and it can do that even at quite low temperatures. And as you can see, they pop out. They make their own little holes in the snow. They sort of melt some of the snow around them. How does this happen? Well, as the thickness of snow reduces, more light comes through, and they're able to absorb the light and then re-emit it as a bit of heat. And this is an infrared photograph of these flowers in snow, and they are melting themselves so that they can be, you know, in advance as the snow melts. They're melting a little bit of snow around them. I think it's fascinating. I did say we did see a few birds, and I'll talk about them. There was a flock of about 20-ish choughs. Now, they're not our red-billed choughs that we'll find in parts of North Wales and Cornwall and so on. These are the alpine choughs with the sort of yellowish bills. By the time I reacted and got the camera out, most of them had flown on, but there was a couple there had landed in the distance, so I managed to photograph. And the other, the astute amongst you will have noticed that that is not a ptarmigan. It's actually a heap of dung, droppings left by a ptarmigan, which of course is very much a montane specialist, and they do seem to use you know, particular spots as latrines. And as we're climbing up the mountain, the soil is getting thinner, and you're on steep slopes. So what holds it all in place? And a lot of it is the roots and branches of some of the plants are there and holding it all back. Things like this trailing azalea, or a couple of species of dwarf willow. And when I'm talking dwarf willow, I mean they really are. If they get to 20 centimeters high, they're giants. The Salix retusa and the Salix reticulata, and you can see how the roots and branches are sort of forming this net and holding the soil on the mountain. There are 3 or 4 main species of primula around, and we also came across a few of them. They do hybridize. We came across a few of the hybrids, which have, you know, characteristics of the 2 parents, as it were. But the snow is getting more persistent. We're on the sides of this. The valley now has, you know, is the trail has left the bottom of the valley, and we're up the sides, and we're walking across these snowbanks. But still there are plants around, not just the soldanellas, the snowbells. But we did eventually make it back down to the station and took the train back to the hotel. And I included this just to show how the railway, you know, zigzags. This is not a rack railway. It's not a cog railway. This is an ordinary so-called adhesion worked railway. It just the steel wheels on the rail, and it has to zigzag, and it is quite a significant gradient that it climbs up and down. Okay, the next spot is Morteratsch, which is still just a glacier, and it's glaciated valley. Again, I'll just zoom in on that. So the station on the line is here, and we walk up this valley where the glacier used to be until we eventually, somewhere off the bottom there, get to the head of the glacier now, or the nose of the glacier now. And if I look at a map showing the history of glaciation in the area, so here we're back with the valley as a whole, San Moritz there. You can see the dark blues are where permanent ice was in the 1850s, mid-19th century. And you can see how it has receded back to just the areas now that are, well, now 2016, because it's got worse again, where the ice has gone back to. And if I zoom in on the Morteratsch area, which is this finger here, you can see how it's crept back. And in the last 15 years, we've lost a further 1 kilometer of glacier. Sorry, the last 100 years, we lost a kilometer of glacier. So it's going even faster than 100 meters a year now. It really is retreating very quickly with climate warming. But we start, and we're basically walking backwards through a vegetative succession. So we're starting down where the nose of the glacier was about 170 years ago or so. 160, 170 years. And you can see that you've got scrub and trees and so on, and a lot of grasses. And this is the glacial river, of course. This is here as the sculpture, which sort of denotes symbolically the nose of the glacier. As we walk up the valley, we pass posts that say basically glacier was here in year X. And it gives you a very vivid impression of how the glaciers are retreating. And one of the attributes of glacier, of course, is moraine. Now, when I'm taking this photograph, I'm standing on a, what do they call it? A dunlin, I think, which is one of these heaps of moraine. There are other areas where there are large boulders that are just dropped, so-called drop stones by the glaciers, and on the side there's a lot of moraine as well, and that is finely ground up grit taken from the rocks of the mountain on from which the glacier came, and it's very free draining. Here we're looking a bit further up the glacier into actually one of its tributaries, which I'll come to later. But if we think about the moraine, it's very free draining, and you've got these mainly dwarf plants, particularly until they can over decades, the soil can accumulate on the moraine. You've got these often fairly deep-rooted plants that will find and hold moisture even when things dry out. But you've also, as I said, you've got these large boulders, and there are cracks and crevices in those, and plants that grow in them. Things like this silver saxifrage here. Now, this has a way of coping with too much lime. Some of these, obviously, from limestone, and the water is dissolving the rock, and so there's a lot of lime in the water that the plant takes up. And if it's got too much of it, it gets rid of it by secreting the lime in the little hairs on the leaves, which is part of what makes it silvery. There are these seed heads. Now, these are the seed heads of the creeping havens, which is a geum. And you can see they've got these sort of spirally twisted seed heads, which are quite interesting. And I'm later on, when we're higher up on another day, I'm going to show you what the flower looks like. But there's mosses in certain places where there's enough moisture retained, you get mosses. And there was these gorgeous and small, very small eyelash fungus, which was this bright orangey red color, which is very pretty. And where you've got enough soil retained and enough grasses and other plants and vetches and so on, that we found Mazarine blue. This is a beautiful, fresh, male, bright blue with the dark veinings on it. Absolutely wonderful. But it wasn't just that. There were other species, some of which we find in this country. In fact, all of the ones in this particular slide. The Highland marble is quite pretty with the, it's hard to see, but you've got this sort of leady silver coloured lines on it. The clue is in the name, the Highland marble. That tells you where you find it in Britain. The silver ground carpet we can get in Buckinghamshire, at least. Anywhere particularly, they do prefer chalk. They're not too fussy, but they do prefer chalk. But one here I was noticing is that they are paler than the ones that we get. Conversely, Linda will see this one. The clouded border here, same species as the one we have locally. Now, this one is slightly odd because the angle at which the light is hitting it is making this black edge rather shiny. But if you ignore that, it's really thick, solid lines, whereas the ones that we have, the black markings are much more delicate. But it's the same species. And eventually we get up towards the nose of the glacier in the modern times, and you can see how much less there is in the ground. We'll show you some close-ups of plants in a minute. You can't get onto the glacier. You can't even get underneath the nose. It's simply too dangerous. These have got big blocks of ice and stone and boulders in, and it melts. And when that happens, they roll off and they squash people. So you have to say a certain distance from it. We did just get somewhere over here, which actually is not as close as it seems. This is the ice, and it's filthy, dirty ice because, of course, it picks up all of the rock that gets ground off the glaciers. And the snow is the white stuff is, if you like, is beyond it. So here you get the real pioneer plants, the first ones that come in. Some other saxifrages, for example, which are dotted around some areas where there's enough moisture and other things that they need to be able to take root. And then I and another person walked back down to our hotel beside the railway. So we walked back down the route of the old glacier, and then instead of getting on the station, we walked back down to the next station, Pontresina, where we were. Actually, it's not Pontresina, but and this track goes, as I say, through a wood, and there are gaps in the wood, so you get these glades, these meadowy glades, not very big, but they're enough to attract a whole variety of flowers and insects. Some of which we don't find in this country. And the only one I'm going to point out here is this little micromoth here, which was only basically given this name 3 years ago. It's one of these taxonomic studies things that people realize that what had already been, a moth that had a particular name actually is 2 species, and they've split it. And the one in this area has been recognized as a new thing and been given actually an old name, which is too complicated to explain. But anyhow, very pleased to have found a fairly newly defined moth. So the following day was a day of 2 halves, as they might have said. Part of it is going up to a mountain peak, and part of it is another walk in a valley. So Diavolezza is the mountain peak reached by a long cable car. The Swiss mapping is just fantastic. In my view, it beats even our Woodland survey. So they've got all these clearly marked cable car routes on, ascending from the railway station up to the peak Diavolezza. And then, so you will see in a minute what we saw, what there was in that area. Then we went back down in the cable car and we walked up the Val da Fain. You can sort of get the idea. Val da Fain sounds sort of Latin, Italian-ish almost. And it's the other side of Piz Nair. Remember I talked about Piz Nair when we walked up on this circular walk, Val Minor. This is the limestone peak. Well, here we are on the other side of it. So we'll see that in a minute. But let's start with the peak at Diavolezza. So we're nearly 3,000 meters up, which I'll call 10,000 feet in old money. And it's the reason these cable cars exist, of course, is for skiing. And I suppose people do still ski up here in the summer, but it's principally for hiking in the summer. And here's a panorama view, and you can see here's another glacier that rolls down and into the Morteratsch valley. Here you can see that here is a trail climbing up this hill, and here, for those of you with good eyesight, here are some dots which are people climbing up this ascent. Now, we didn't do that, but we did do some trekking about at the high mountain, and I can show you some of the results of what we showed. Growing in amongst the rocks, again, you've got more of these early flowering species, the primroses, for example, and more the plants that cling like cushions to rocks. We've also got this member of the ranunculuses, which is accurately named Glacier crowfoot, but also the plant with the very dramatic name, the King of the Alps, which for my mean is slightly overselling. It's a very pretty plant, but it's slightly overselling it. But here is the creeping avens. We saw that earlier with its spiral seed heads. Here is the plant in flower, because we are 1,000 meters higher up. So that I took with a zoom lens. And here is a photograph that Marigold took when some of us went off venturing across the mountain. So here you see that there's quite a bit of snow around. There's some steep hillsides and so on. Here, at the end of this arrow, is the little group of people of which I was part, going out looking at these plants. And here is where that King of the Alps was. For those of you with good eyesight, there's this darker, browner color rock here, and it was across the other side of that, an upper slope. This is pure scree. This path is about, what's that, 50 centimeters wide, one person at a time, and then you have to scramble up it to get a close-up shot of the King of the Alps, which is why I stood sort of back here and used my zoom lens to photograph it instead. Right, so having been up Diavolezza, we came back down the cable car and across the other side to the Val da Fain. As I said, here is your Piz Nair again on the right-hand side this time, your limestone area. And here you have more of the fallen rocks. Now, this area is slightly different in terms of the amount of water and so on, and also in terms of what's growing here. So there's quite a lot of juniper growing here. But there's some other plants as well, glowflower you will see. And there is also the water, melting snow, comes out of the limestone at certain points, and you would get these flushes. And in those wet flushes, and I assure you, as various people found out, they are wet, you get these flecked marsh orchids, which are in hundreds. So you get some yet more orchids. You also get other gentians. The giant yellow gentian, this is between, I would say, between waist and chest height, typically. And it has a close relative, the spotted gentian, and you can see how the spotted gentian got its name from the flower. Also the louseworts, a couple of louseworts here, which are root parasites. These are generally taller plants, but we also had others as well, more alpine clematis clambering over the limestone boulders. Alpine aquilegia. Now, many of us will have aquilegia plants in our garden. Alpine aquilegia is a species that has, its flowers are at least 2, and I might say 3 times the size of our garden aquilegias, and this beautiful dark and light blue colouring, so that they're very pretty. More of the plants that form clumps across rocks. In this case, the Dryas octopetala. And this you can see looking back into, this is the Benina Valley here again. And I'll come to this farm in a minute. But first, some more insects. The Crowberry marble. This one eats the caterpillars eat the leaves of bilberry and cranberry, and again another butterfly where there are some local versions of it. We have the clouded yellow, which often flies across from Europe here in the summer, but there are some that do breed locally. There are actually 4 different species of clouded yellows in Switzerland. This one is the moorland cloudy yellow, which you can tell by principally is things to do with the pale dots. And there are other butterflies as well. Meadows are very, very good for butterflies, and there are quite a lot around. So lots of different ringlets. This one is the almond-eyed one. You've got to look at how many of these little dots there are, whether they're surrounded with these orange patches and the shapes of the orange patches and stuff to get which ringlet it is. But anyhow, that's your almond-eyed ringlet. Here's a version of a butterfly that we do get in Britain, and it's the same version, the green hair streak. So it's a much smaller butterfly. You'd have thought the way I've blown it up here, it's bigger than the ringlet, but actually it's probably half or a third of the size. It's a beautiful little green butterfly. So the farm, we came back past the farm, and it was milking time. And this is a problem, you would think, because they drive the cows up into the mountains for the summer grazing, but you need to milk them. So what do you do? How can you milk them? Well, this is a portable milking parlour. Portable, I don't mean to say you put it in your pocket. I mean you can hitch it. It's a trailer. You can hitch it behind your car or 4x4. There's the hitch. This is the wheels are sort of let down there, but they push it up on the wheels. And it can milk up to 4 cows at once, and the cows will peacefully queue outside to be milked. And there, on another trailer, is the churn in which the milk is collected. These days, I think they're then taken back down the mountains to somewhere more central to a dairy to be turned into cheese. But this sort of shows your origins of the various famous Swiss cheeses. Then we went back to the hotel. The hotel is, as I say, just outside Pontresina. It has adjacent to it a meadow. Because it's on the edge of the town, I think it's got some garden escapees as well as a huge pile of naturally derived plants. So you've got peony and lupin here. The lupin could be natural, but I suspect they're garden escapees. But they've also got 2 birds on the pond, which is right next to the hotel. This one is a common sandpiper, and they breed in the area, as do this. And this one is a fieldfare. Now, fieldfares for us are winter visitors, and they go off to Scandinavia, Siberia, and so on in the summer to breed. Well, they also breed in Switzerland, and there is a fieldfare right next to the pond next to the hotel. Right, I have 2 more areas to show you. The first is another mountainous area, another high area. Corvatsch. This involved taking not 1 but 2 cable cars, firstly up to Murtel and then up to Corvatsch. Then the plan was that we'd take the cable car back to Murtel, and we would walk along a mountain path to a sort of mountain refuge come hotel come cafe, and then walk down this long descent down a valley, a very good descent to the next door valley and back. It didn't quite work out that way. Firstly, we're up at Corvatsch. Now we're at 3,300 meters, so I'll call that 11,000 feet. And here's the view, and you can't see it in this photograph, but there was a telescope there, and you can actually see the Matterhorn, which is 170 kilometers away, but you could just see it on the horizon, at least with a telescope. What you could see, here's a panorama looking down over the Engadine Valley, the 3 lakes, and feeding St. Moritz. And here, I've blown it up, this area here, blown it up, and here you see the St. Moritz next to its 3rd lake. But there wasn't a lot of plant life, and we need anything else at there. So we came back down, as predicted, to Murtel to start our walk. And we did indeed find, again, the snow in this particular patch had just disappeared. So we have the dwarf snowbell again, and a rather interesting saxifrage. But there was actually quite a lot of snow. Here is the track that we were due to walk along towards the refuge. And we did indeed walk about as far as here, and that's where that saxifrage was. But we were due to continue along, climb on this zigzag path, and eventually up to the refuge here, and then over the top and down the other side into the valley. There was a lot of snow. We had to walk across a lot of snow on the path here, and it was going to get worse. And although there were some other tourists who clearly did make it up here, we also came across a German couple who told us they were experienced hikers and they had turned back. So our leader said, no, we're not going to do that. And anyhow, because we'd had to go so slow because of the snow, we'd run out of daylight. It was going to be a long walk down the valley. So we stopped here and had lunch, and it's a fantastic set of views to have lunch. I didn't show the view behind us, but it's out over the valley facing St. Moritz. So brilliant. So what we'll do is we'll go somewhere else instead. And so we went to another place called Muragl, which is again go up the side of a mountain, this time on a funicular railway. So here's a funicular railway up to here, and have a look around here and some plants here, and it's just as well we did, because we saw some plants we wouldn't otherwise have seen. So here is Muragl. The views from it, spectacular as ever. One gets a bit blasé about these, but they really are great. You can see the U-shaped glaciated valleys. This was the only place that we found spring crocus in an area. You can just see how it's been, all the grass, last year's grass is flattened by the snow. You can see how it's just emerged from the snow. There's your crocus come through, and here is a gorgeous little lily, dwarf lily. It's only about 10 centimeters high. So fascinating little lily. And I managed to find some insect life. Firstly, I found the northern wheatear hopping around, catching insects to feed its young that we could see it feeding. A caterpillar marsh fistillary butterfly eating the leaves of the giant yellow gentian. And as we were due to go back down the hill in the funicular, you go into the funicular, which is inside a little shelter at the top of its run. And so it's really quite dark in there because you're out of the bright sun. And there on the wall, in the gloom, was this interesting looking pug moth. So final day. We started at St. Moritz, and we went up two funiculars. So the first one from St. Moritz to Chantarella, then from another one from Chantarella to Corviglia, and then up in a cable car to Piz Nair. Again, a high mountain, nearly 3,000 meters or so. We should come back down, and then we walked down from Corviglia, walked down this track. There's some interesting geology, back to the next funicular station, and then down. So the statue of the Alpine ibex, I should have said that is the symbol of the canton of Graubünden. We had seen and heard white-winged snowfinches at several high points on our trip. They're hard to photograph. They don't come very close. They don't come for very long. But there's a photograph of a white-winged snowfinch. And you can see there's a little group of people there. Some of these people are not part of our party, but this is a part of our party looking at some plants. And here is a much better view of King of the Alps, which you didn't need a zoom lens for. Now, that photograph I took of the people looking at it was in the grey and the cloud. The sun came out for long enough for me to get these two photographs up there at 3,000 meters of the King of the Alps, which to me is like a dwarf forget-me-not in appearance. And the saxifrage. But it was pretty cloudy up there, mostly. We then took the cable car back down to Corviglia and started walking down from there. A bit more sun initially, and a couple of things. This spinious thistle is, the spines on this thistle are not especially bad. They're still spinies, but it's just incredible numbers of them. The geological aspect of this is gypsum. And it's a deposit of gypsum up there that has been crumbled quite a lot by the usual sort of freeze-thaw action and by glaciation. And that creates its own habitat. Lots of marmots around because it's very easy for them to burrow into. And we saw a number of plants that we hadn't seen elsewhere. Edelweiss, finally, the the famous plant of the Alps, as it were. Well, that was the first wild Edelweiss we saw. We did see some Edelweiss that had been cultivated next to a cable car station, and growing in this bare bits of the gypsum and alpine toe flax. Also, lots of other plants. Won't go through them in great detail, but here you see a view across the fairly steep hillside, and you can just see the sheer number of flowers there are growing in it. Can't do without some moths, of course. Now, we saw this species, Metax mestifrigalis, in a lot of places. It's very common in meadows. Here, because we were gradually, the weather was changing, we'd lost the sun, and I was able to photograph it out of the sun. And what you don't see is in the sun, it is a very, very shiny moth. Out of the sun, it looks just dull and doesn't look as though it'd be very shiny, but it's extremely shiny. Those of us who are mothers know the Cnephasia genus, which are very plain, boring moths in this country. You can't distinguish between each other. This is a related genus, Xeris Cnephasia. This one is beautifully patterned with this grey colour with black bits across it, the silvery colour, and some rusty bits. And that looks good enough. But actually, when you look at it from the side, you find that the black bits are all these so-called scale tufts, and you can see how they're all sort of sticking up. So that was fascinating to see. And then another insect, marigold spotted, on this Edelweiss flower was what's known as a bagworm, or a moth, Psychidae. I'm not sure which species is it. If it were in this country, I'd have been fairly certain it was the one I've written there, Psychicasta. But there are other possibilities that it could have been. They're called this for two reasons. Firstly, they work like caddisflies, that the larvae create, in this case, is little bits of dried grass stem. Other species might use pebbles or bits of vegetation or lichen or moss or something like that as a case to live in. The same sort of thing that caddisflies do underwater, the larvae. But they're called bagworms because although the males can fly, are winged, the adults, the adult females don't have wings, and they look, frankly, just like a plain old caterpillar. They just look like a larva. That's why they're called bagworms. Anyhow, as you can see, the weather is closing in. The forecast for that coming evening was terrible. Very heavy rains. They were on what would have been in this country been an amber weather warning, just as we've just had for rain. The clouds descending. This couple who are using these are vertiginous mountain bike tracks. People come down them at mad speeds. That they'd stopped to admire the view, and the view had disappeared. And we started to sort of hurry up because you really don't want to get stuck in the mountains with mist all around you, and heavy rain forecast. But so we did rather rush down, but got a few plants we did see. Firstly, another large wet area, lots of water came out, where the gypsum deposits ended and met an impermeable deposit, and that's where all the water obviously comes out of the spring line. Marsh orchids, broadleaf marsh orchids, by their tens of thousands. I couldn't do this justice. If I zoomed out on this, you wouldn't really see the orchids, but there were just tens of thousands of them. Getting a bit lower, near the cable station, you get these plants that grow on rocks, particularly this gorgeous pink and white combination of two species here, just cushioning the rock. I think that was absolutely fantastic. So that was pretty much the end of our final day. The next day, we travelled back to England. Marigold and I, did the whole thing by train. This photograph was not taken on the day we travelled back, which is a grey, miserable day, because we were indeed in the deluge the night before, and the mountain rivers that we passed going back by train were torrents. So this, though, I picked this photograph because it reminds me of the railway, the spectacular alpine views, the meadows and the flowers, and is just a lovely thing to leave you with. So I'll stop there and see if anyone has any questions.